Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Frankie, every day that I record with you, I ask myself, why didn't I ask better questions during the interview process for doing this podcast? And so I thought we should probably go back to one of our more popular episodes. This was a top 5 episode we did. Episode, I think it was number 50, which was how to answer 5 of the most common job interview questions. And given that people don't just ask 5 interview questions, we are talking today about 5 more common interview questions. And I think I did a poor job of asking you questions at the end of our interview when you said, let's do a podcast.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
So in 1994, Adam Sandler released a song and he called it the Hanukkah song. And the song starts off like this. Time to take out your menorahs, put on your yarmulke. It's time for Hanukkah. So much fun to celebrate Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a festival of lights. Instead of one day of presents, we get 8 crazy nights when you feel like the only kid in town without a Christmas tree. And he says in 1994, here's a list of people who are Jewish, just like you and me. But in 1999, he released a sequel to this song. Everything was the same. And he goes, here is a new list of people who are Jewish, just like you and me. So this is a reprisal of that first episode. It's different. The intro is the same. It's interview questions, but it's a whole new list of questions.
And we are older and wiser and probably, more experienced in this podcast is going to make this an episode even more of a banger than the first one. Little known fact, part of the reason we're doing this episode also today is when we initially put our outline together a year ago to do the first episode, that episode was going to be 8 amazing interview questions you can answer. So 60% of our outline was already complete for this today. So we went back in and thought, that's a little less work to have to put into a podcast. Just got to add 2 items to our outline.
So we use a company called Mathews. For those of you that listen, you probably have seen this on somewhere on the internet. And Mathews celebrated us a couple of days ago. So we got past our 100th episode, which is a big deal. This for us is episode 104. But we've had some delays between episode 103 and 104. Some things have happened. Some life has gotten in the way. It's been about a month, maybe a little over a month since we've recorded. So today's kind of a hit by pitch. We're going to just get on base any way we possibly can.
We're leaning into one.
We need to get back on the horse. We've fallen off the horse.
Leaning into one with the elbow. I love it.
That's it. So just lean into it. Lean into a curve, not the fastball.
I can't wait.
So in all seriousness, this is a popular episode for us because I think it's relevant. When we're recording this episode, Ian and I think we're heading into a recession. It's no longer called a recession nowadays. They got to wait for a board to appoint a recession, unlike the old days where it was a recession if you had 2 quarters of either flat or negative GDP growth. And it's hard, but unemployment is really low. And it's really hard to hire people. So you need to hire the right people because it's tough. Hiring is always critical. So there's 2 sides of this. If you are an interviewer, these are questions that we think will help get you over the hump of hiring the right people. And if you are an interviewee, these are questions you're most likely going to hear. So if you've interviewed with Ian or me, you've heard some combination of these questions. And we thought it was something that's worthwhile to talk about because hiring is hard.
And I think just as Let Me Speak to a Manager was way ahead of the recession, I'm talking months before anyone was talking about it, we did a episode on why we're already in a recession and how to survive it. What you're going to see, and this should be no shock to anyone who's out job searching, this market is going to quickly turn from a job seekers market to a hiring managers market. And
very quickly.
I think it's going to happen really quick. because you're already starting to see, you're starting to hear about layoffs.
Big boys are laying off
about
tons of thousands of people. Amazon, we talked about it here. Amazon has laid off tens of thousands of people. Apple, Google, Tesla. The first wave, though, Ian, I think that's worth talking about. It's the first thing is, am I getting productivity out of the people who are working here, right? So I have a friend who works at a monster company, and he said the first wave, we put a hiring freeze. Second wave is we look at our real estate, make sure there's no real estate. And then we go through and we kind of weed out the bottom 10 to 20% of the people who are here, because when there's euphoric hiring freeze, there's people who got through that shouldn't have. So those are the first things you're going to see. And then as companies do have needs, there's great people that are out and about that have resumes because they were working for bad companies. So there's kind of like a poaching expedition by good companies. And that's
that's a good point. I think even the companies that are staying flat, Frank, on their employees, and a lot of the big tech companies have said that we're kind of freezing the number of hires. What that means, though, is let's go. There are more people out there. We can be opportunistic. We're keeping more of our people. Let's go shit can the bottom 10, 15% who haven't been really performing well for 4 years, but we've kept them because we couldn't find enough people. We were short staffed. So we were taking the approach of anyone that can fog a mirror can stay in that job. Well, now that business has slowed down and customers are buying less of our products, we're going to go replace those people with more talented people out there. And that's an opportunity. If you're looking for a job, people are looking for upgrades right now. So when you answer your questions, you need to be thinking about, how do I clearly show that I'm an upgrade to someone who's already on your staff? And I think for managers out there, recessions are a great time to reset the deck. I found it when I've managed through multiple recessions, and in every time I came out of the recession with a much stronger team than I went into. And that's because on the last legs of a big upturn for the economy, you end up with a bunch of people that you kind of just brought on board because, one, you had a lot of fat, you had a lot of revenue, a lot of profits. You could afford to be not as nimble with your staff. But two, you couldn't find anyone better. So you just kept some people and you're like, they're a 5 out of 10, but I couldn't like, if I replaced them, I'd get a 4. Now you can find some 8s and 9s. You're going to see a lot of people replace them. And if you're a manager, that should be exactly what you're thinking about. How do I come out of this recession with a better team than I had when I went into it?
There's another sign that we're in a really, really frothy job market. I don't know if this is going to work on you as a series of questions, because Ian only eats his meals at Ruth's Chris. But when was the last time you went to eat somewhere that wasn't Ruth's Chris and the order actually came out right?
Oh, man. Even Ruth's Chris has been screwing up lately. Even they've been screwing up the orders or forgetting about us, or you're waiting a little long to get for someone to come out and give you menus.
The only experience
my answer to that is I only eat at Ruth's Chris. So they've been screwing up a little lately. So that shows. So
the only answer to this question I can come up with is I was in Detroit with Ian for something, and I went to Chick-fil-A, and it was the best experience I've had with food in a while. Like, people were friendly, the order was right. But besides that, when my wife and I go to one of 6 restaurants over and over again in Richmond, you can't get the service right. Like, they screw something up. They don't write stuff down. Like I actually bet someone I'll pay you 100% tip if you get this order 100% right. And she literally came back 2 minutes later and said, was that a sweet tea or an unsweet tea? Like, literally couldn't get the order right. And this is a sign, because people working in restaurants are typically the last line. When the service is that bad, all the great people are employed. You tend to notice that when you're at the back end or the start of a recession, that's exactly what starts to happen, is you can't get good service. And the pandemic has probably hastened this a little bit, but it's a sign that there is going to be firings, and there's going to be a lot of them, and so I think this is the perfect time to dust this off and talk again about the importance of interview.
So if you haven't listened to episode 50, I'm going to summarize real quickly what are the 5 questions that we talked about in that episode. So the first was, tell me a little bit about yourself. The second,
so I'm going to pretend like you're interviewing me now. Point of this question is, it's an easy softball to start. You should get comfortable. The whole point and the goal is people usually have some nerves. That is a question that professional interviewers are going to ask to warm you up to make you feel comfortable.
Frank, you're a fantastic color man, but I will say at this point, I'm just doing a tease because I want people to go listen to that episode. So don't be giving away the answers.
Oh, there's more there.
The second question, what is your greatest strength? We talk about how to answer that question.
My greatest strength is shutting the fuck up when I'm told.
Stop it. Number 3, what is your greatest weakness? Number 4, tell me about a failure that you learned from.
Somewhere Uncle Joe is saying, Ian, stop talking.
And number 5, why do you want to work here? So if you have ever been asked one of those questions and you struggle with it, go listen to the first episode, part 1. We get into great detail in that episode. So without further ado, without Frank ruining any of the my teas, we are going to get into our first question on 5 more common questions and how to ask them. Number 6. So we are on 6 now.
Am I allowed to talk now?
Number 6, Frankie, why don't you go ahead and say the question?
What would your coworkers say about you?
Ooh, so Frankie, when you ask this question, what are you trying to get at as an employer, and especially as someone who owns their own business?
So the most important thing I'm asking with this question is self-awareness. I'm really not asking about, I want to see what people would say. What's the perception? But more importantly, I'm not going to interview those people. I want to see how global are you? How able are you able to see your performance from the outside? This is an incredible time to use humility. That's what I think when I ask this question.
I love that you said that.
Yep. This is the time for me to say, you know what? I'm a hard charger. Sometimes I can step on people's toes. And what I've learned is like, I have standards that I need to kind of loosen up at times. Let me tell you something about that. I have really run into problems with this. And what I've done is I've adjusted to be better because of this. Like, it's a perfect time to lean into some self-reflection.
I love that you said that. You always want to present yourself in the best light. You're in an interview. I get it. You want to come across as someone who's very positive, but the humility thing you said is important because it comes across as more believable when you paint yourself as a human being and not this perfect robotic, employee that does everything by the books and everybody loves all the time. One thing that I like when people do, because it's more memorable, I would recommend that you tell a story. So instead of, well, I could just, my coworkers say I'm a great team player, or my boss has told me I'm a real people person. Those are boring and they don't really separate you. If I'm interviewing 5 people and I ask the same question, if 4 of them just use some superlatives and adjectives, and one of them tells me a really cool story about what their teammates think about them, I'm going to remember the one that told me a story. So, instead of saying I'm a great team player, say, well, maybe I can give you an example. For the past 2 months, our manager has spent extended time out of the office traveling. He's opening up a new region. And I think the best compliment I would get is my manager told me how nice it's been that so few people are reaching out to him because they're going to me to answer the questions. And I had a number of my coworkers go to my manager and say how helpful I've been, that there's always a line at my door. And I think that explains me as a person. So that is a different way of saying my coworkers would say I'm a team player. That's not memorable to me. That's just something anyone would write on a resume or a cover letter. The second is a story that blows me away, that says, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I will remember that if 5 people all tell me something drab and you tell me that story.
So one of the things that I can't remember if we talked about this last time or not, but whenever anybody comes to me for interview coaching, what I talk about is I talk about writing down and coming prepared with not only questions for the person interviewing you, but more importantly, successes or stories about your career. And what Ian just touched on and what I talked about initially with humility, there's a way you can accomplish this. And you can, if I was faced with this question, I'd say, I'm not exactly sure what my coworkers would say about me, but here's what I would hope they would say about me. And I would go into stories, accomplishments, things that we've worked on together, areas and times where I've helped pick up the ball for someone. And What I will tell you is if you're sitting across from me interviewing, I know you're not messiah of job hires, because if you were, you wouldn't be sitting in my office. Like, you wouldn't be allowed to walk out. So there's something there. So being honest and forthright and talking about things, but showing demonstration of things that you've done very well is critical. So past performance is not an indicator of future performance, but it's a pretty damn good hint. So if you show hints and stories and you talk to about things that I can kind of latch onto, that's important. So I'm going to kind of go into process quickly, because I think this makes sense. In our business, we use a panel style interview. And what that means is you'll interview with 2 or 3 different managers, and then the managers will rank you on like 16 key components. And then we talk afterwards about the interview. But what usually comes up as we're talking about problem solving or team orientation is a story about, there was an incredible story that they told about this. So those stories are critically important. So if you come in prepared with a story about teamwork, this is the perfect time to not make it about you, but make it about team. And that is how you can answer an interviewer's question about what would people say about you in a way that doesn't come off as arrogant, comes off as global, that comes off as, 360 type of feedback. And it makes it like, wow, this person is aware of their surroundings. And it sounds like there's somebody we want to have on our team.
So I'm just going to we started with why an interviewer would ask this question. I'm going to finish with that. If you are a manager, I value this question very much. And I've got a story to tell on this, Frankie. So do you remember a kid by the name of Connor Cook? He was the starting quarterback for Michigan State for like 3 years when they were winning the Rose Bowl, and they were really good. This was probably, 2005, 6, 7, 8, maybe around that.
The name
time.
sounds familiar, but I couldn't remember.
Okay. Well, I follow Michigan sports a little more in Big Ten, but really good quarterback, big arm, won a ton of games. And there was they were wondering, is this guy a first or a second round quarterback? Could he play for the NFL? But something they kept bringing up in the process was on his team, his junior and senior year, when he was the starting quarterback of a really good team, his teammates did not vote him as one of the team's 5 team captains.
Right.
And I remember at the time thinking, man, that's overly harsh. But you're the quarterback. You should be the most respected person. And he dropped way into the later rounds. And Connor Cook ended up not being much of an NFL quarterback. And part of it was he was kind of a problem in the locker room. And so it matters what your teammates think about you. Now, you're not always going to be able to say, hey, I was voted team captain in my office and my, settlement services branch. Like, people don't vote captains, but you should be able to tell some stories that would accurately depict how and it could be recognition that you received from something. So again, if you're answering this question, guessing what they would say about you is one thing, and that's sort of nice. Maybe tell a story. It'd be really cool though if you shared with me, well, instead of guessing, I could tell you some recent recognition I got from one of my peers. Would you like to hear that? And then tell a story about why one of your peers went to your boss and said great things about you and what you did to deserve that honor. That's it. That's the best way you could explain it, is saying, let's not guess. I'll give you a great example of something someone said about me recently. So that's why I think you want to go out and I think even further, show your confidence, be willing to offer references. So would it help if I gave you a few phone numbers of my current peers that I work with? Now, obviously choose some people that aren't going to go run and tell your boss that you're interviewing, pick a few people, but would that help? No one's going to really call those people, but you could say, I'll tell you exactly what these folks will say and why they would say it. That shows confidence that, don't take my word for it, call my coworkers.
Ian and I are different people. I would respond differently to this question than Ian, clearly. The point of the matter is lean into the question the way that suits you the best and allows you to provide your best foot. And that's important to you. How you answer the question means less than the content with which you answer it with. That's what an interview is. You get to show individuality, I guess. But the point of the matter is you can show who you are in your way that fits you. And the important things is you are tolerable by others. You do work with others. You have an understanding of other people's opinion of you, and you can express it. If you tell me like, everybody loves me, and that's the end of the answer, that's going to probably be the end of our interview, because I know you're a dipshit and I'm not going to interview you. And honestly, you probably don't even make it to my office if you said that to somebody else, because they'll cut the interview short.
So the second question that we're going to talk about, interview question, is Jack Welch, who is my favorite leadership guru, CEO of GE for 20 years, manager of the century. He said that if you could only ask one question in an interview as a manager, this is the interview question that you should ask, and you should ask it over and over. And that is, why did you leave that company? Or if you're still at the company, why are you considering leaving the company? And I think I pound on this. I spend 10 minutes on this. I will go through your whole resume and I will ask you why you left every company. And I think if you're listening to this and you are about to apply for an interview, this can be a trap question. Pay really close attention to your tone when you answer. And the reason why I say that is, when I ask you why you left a company and you describe a company that is very much like mine, and you complain about everything, and you say the manager was an idiot and all of those things, or you just describe an office setting that is very much run the way ours is, and you just didn't like it, you're likely not going to be happy working for me either. And I'm looking here. Do you have couth? Do you know how to be professional? Do you know how to professionally say it was time for me to move on for another opportunity? Or do you just kind of spray bullets all over the place, the office that you were working for? Because if that's who you are, you'll probably do that with me at some point. Likely, I've joked before that my sister's never had a manager. She didn't think it was an idiot. And at some point, there's got to have at least been one in a 25-year career there. So it's maybe just you, Monica, that doesn't really like working for managers, which is fine. But if all you do is complain about them, you're likely not going to like the one you're interviewing with.
Those are all true. So in an interview, an interviewer is going after several things. They're coming after problem solving, team orientation. If it's a sales related role, persuasion, judgment, and results orientation. Those are your major macro categories. This is a question that shows judgment and problem solving. And let me tell you why. Judgment comes down to, what am I sharing? What am I talking about? What is and is not suitable for a manager that I might work with to hear? Do I phrase it in a way that is complimentary yet somewhat dismissive and saying this is just not the right spot for me? I think that's high judgment. I think that's well-chosen story. I think that is a well-executed answer. There's some strategy that comes into this. During the pandemic, I loved interviewing great people that work for bad managers or bad companies. They didn't have a strategy. They didn't know what to do. They had to close for an extended period of time. That is problem solving at its finest. That is judgment at its finest. I saw there was problems ahead. I have 50 employees at this point. 10 to 15% of them have taken pay cuts to come here. And the reason they've taken the pay cut to come here is because they like how we're positioned to go forward. That's incredible. That's they say, we've seen you, we've researched you, we know what you're about, we like the mission. I might make a little bit less to start, but I think because of the trajectory of the company, I'm going to have an opportunity to make more long-term. And that is what I want to do. I mean, there's two people that you've recommended that I've hired that have both taken, that was the exact opportunity, right? There was a little bit of a pay cut to hopefully leap forward. So those are the things that
for the record, I offered him both jobs with me, but the pay cut would have been substantially larger. So Frank's making a little more money than me. So he was able to pay him a little more than the less they would have been making.
But why are you considering leaving? That's a way to spin that in the positive. I love the mission of this place. I love what you do. I think the product is exciting. I think what you do in a day-to-day, I needed something fresh. I like how it's different every day. That's a very positive way to spin what could be a shit flinging exercise. And instead you turn it into a real positive. And
this,
what I picked.
Sorry, Frank, I just, one quick thing. This is a really good chance to show your homework,
Yes.
to show that you prepped a little bit, to show why I would go to Cava and make less money. And not that everyone makes less money going to Frank. Those are unique examples, but being able to describe what you've learned during the interview process and your prep and why I want to come here. You want to talk about how I think it's more about the windshield than the rearview mirror. It's not about I'm trashing my other company. It's about how damn excited I am about the environment and the culture you've been building this company. I just want to be a part of it. It's amazing.
And that's how you can take a potential negative and turn it into a huge positive, is talking about that. You can spin it. I don't really care if you answer my question. What I care is to understand you and to get some examples into your brain. And do you fit with us? You're going to spend 2, 3, 4 hours with us total. And we have to make a big career decision and a big, this is a big decision offer a position to someone. So you have to get inside of that person's head. And where you take the question is almost as important as how you answer the question. And it shows a significant amount. Ian looks at prep and he looks at homework and looks at those things. I look at spin, story, likability, problem solving, intelligence. Those are the things I'm going for in that question, to see how did you, what kind of flexibility do you have? That's what's critical.
I love it. Frankie, go ahead and take the next question. This is your favorite.
Ian, tell me about a professional achievement that you are incredibly proud of.
I love it. And you will ask that multiple different ways. So you won't
Correct.
just ask for one. You'll follow up, give me another, what's something else you've accomplished here? What's another achievement you have?
So I'm going to start at the answer and work backwards, right? Here's what I want to understand when I ask this question. I'm hoping you give me a lifetime achievement award. Now, I don't want to perjure you. You might say, I've had this happen. I survived cancer. I'm a single mom. I've had every answer you can possibly imagine. And I'm going to get to learn something about you, right? And I'll lean in and I'll ask some questions about it. Like, okay, I said professional, you told me about cancer. What did you do? They'll tell me about incredible achievements that they've done, like all kinds of crazy stuff. But what I want to understand is this. Straight up doesn't exist. If you look at the stock chart of EMC until 2001, it was like a hockey stick. Look at it since. It's been a jagged edge. I don't even think it exists anymore. But the point of the matter is most careers are not meteoric rises. What they are instead is they are ups and downs and backs and forwards. There's achievement, there's failures, there's successes. And what I want to understand is this. Do you have a pattern of success? And if you have a pattern of success, have you figured out how to make it happen over and over again? So we've talked about this before. You asked me in the beginning, or I think it was before we started recording, do I have a cool story? There's somebody that I interviewed last week that we've ultimately hired. He had 8 jobs at the same hotel. He started off as a dishwasher and he ended as a manager. And we went through each role. He told me about how he learned every role. This is an incredibly cool story, Ian. This kid had made it to bartender, and he found himself getting waiter shift or bartending shifts on Mondays. And one of his managers came up to him and said, look, I'm giving you Mondays. You're really bad. Our cost per drink is really high. Our service times are slow. This is not good. I'm going to have to move you back to waiter if you don't get better and fast. He's like, okay, message heard. I know I kind of stink. And I said, okay, what'd you do about it? Now, I don't care that he was a crappy bartender. He's not going to be serving drinks here. Yeah. What I care about is this part of the story. So I took the feedback seriously. I found who was the best person at the company. That was a mixologist. And I went and learned from him. I sat down before my shifts and after my shifts when I was off with a notepad, and I would ask, how do you make these drinks? And I came up with things in my head that allowed me to remember what a drink was, because it's critical to be quick. So I wanted to remember what components of the drink were. In addition to that, when I would finish my shift, I'd take notes. And before my shift would start, I'd sit in my car and I'd study my drink sheet. I want to hire this person. That is someone who leaned into the feedback. They stunk. Everyone stinks at a new job. That's what promotion feels like. Oh God, I went from great to terrible. But what do you do about it? And then what I thought was really cool is he got promoted to after bartender into another role, and he used those lessons. I went back to the same type of script. I learned from what I didn't know last time. I took notes. I found the best person. That's perfect. That is a wonderful, wonderful answer about a great achievement. I went from terrible to great, and here's the process.
Yeah, in a not so sexy industry, right? In a industry that doesn't take a college degree or doesn't, but I don't even know this guy, Frank. I know he's coachable. He took criticism and he didn't get defensive. And I know that he's resourceful. He didn't go just say, well, tell me, manager, what do I need to do better? He went and found someone who was great.
That's
and
it, all on his own.
And he's resilient. He figured it out. He put extra work. That tells me about his work ethic, that he's willing to study in his own time so that he can make more money and be better at his job. Like I learned 6-7 behaviors of that kid just from your little story. And again, we harp on it a lot. Stories matter. Stories matter. They matter everywhere. They matter whether you're interviewing. They matter if you're recruiting and trying to convince people to come work for you. They matter if you're a manager. They matter if you're in sales. That story is so impactful that because I will remember him, and I hope I meet him the next time I'm in your office, because that's the kind of person that I would like to work with.
There's something else there, right? Ian just told you 2 or 3 things that now Ian can score: resilience, problem solving. That, like, it's a story about an achievement, but you're getting so much more out of it. I'm not asking, tell me your biggest example of persuasion. It's a terrible question. What I want to know is an achievement. I want to see where you take it. That also, to me, it touches a little bit on problem solving. It touches on persuasion. The other thing it did is it connected with me. I bartended. I was terrible at it. I had to do the same thing. I like this person more now because I can relate to him. And I leaned in. I said, I remember that. I was awful. He goes, yeah. And I was like, I always used to get confused on a Tom Collins, and he giggled because it's a simple drink. There's 3 ingredients. There's ice, there's gin, and there's like a piece of fruit. That's it. Like, it's the simplest thing. I'm like, but that's where I had to start. So we have a dialogue. Now, as a hiring manager, if you're paying attention to these things, what you also can do is you make notes. What we've gotten in the habit of doing is taking lessons that we've learned in an interview and jotting them down. So people are their most vulnerable. They're talking most personally about themselves. You can say, hey, bartender, next time you see him, and joke with them. Like, that actually connects to people. That's how you build camaraderie with people quickly, because they told you a story and you remember the story.
Sure. And Frankie, you don't need to be a bartender for that story to resonate with you. So if you're an interviewing manager, like, when I hear that story, I think of myself failing as a new salesperson and my manager giving me some feedback and saying, buddy, you better start selling or I'm gonna have to replace you. And instead of whining and saying, I haven't been trained, I went and sat with good salespeople, and I went and took notes, listened, asked them questions. How do you talk to customers? How do you get people interested? Every time I failed on a cold call, I took notes after and tried to learn from what worked, what seemed to keep them on the phone, what didn't. His whole process of learning to be a better bartender, you could translate it to any high achiever who didn't have a lot of training, who figured out how to get there without whining. That translates to almost any job. And so as an interviewing manager, you can't look at it and say, well, he's a bartender. How does that translate? Like, there is tiers of bartenders. There are the absolute elite that make a lot of money, and there are the crappy ones that have bad service. And he found a way to go from crappy to really good.
I got a vice president's job answering a question exactly like that. It was slightly different. It came out of my mouth, not his. But I literally became a vice president at NVR, and I talked about failures, setbacks, and how I became an achiever in multiple roles. I think I probably started with bartender, and I worked my way through project manager, sales manager, sales rep, costing manager, production manager. Every single job I had prior to vice president, I talked about, here's how this works. Like, you are a great achiever, you're tapped on the shoulder, you're asked to move to the next role. And when you move to the next role, you're really bad at it. So you have to understand is where are your inherent strengths? What are your inherent weaknesses? Who's really good at your inherent strengths or your weaknesses? And then how do you mimic some of those things inside of your job? And how do you do it quickly? What I wanted to point out to him in that process is this. He's already solved how to enter a new job and do it well. And when I told him when he gets into this job is he'll get feedback from us and he needs to be honest to himself about what he's great at and what he stinks at and figure out how to be better at the things he's not inherently great at right off the bat and round out those edges. And if you do that, you'll start to succeed much, much, much faster than most. And I was like, the hard part's done. You know the process. And if you know that process, I want to hire you. And it doesn't matter what role. If you figured this piece out, you have solved the biggest trick of getting a new job.
I've got a counter example to this. So I had a young guy that had worked for a bank and he had been there for like 4 years, Frankie. And in those 4 years, he was promoted an insane amount of times, like 5 promotions in 4 years, like silly.
Right.
And so when I was asking him about accomplishments, all he could say was, I got promoted this many times and I've been promoted and I've been promoted. And do you remember the criticism that Buddy Ryan gave Chris Carter for the Eagles? Chris Carter was a star wide receiver. His quote, it was, I won't put you on the spot. It was, all he does is catch touchdowns.
Yeah.
And they cut him because on its surface, it sounds stupid. Like, well, that sounds pretty good. He catches touchdowns. But what Buddy Ryan was saying, you don't block. When the ball's not coming to you in the end zone, you don't run hard routes. You don't do the little things. You will only run a hard route when you know you're getting the ball and you could score. And this kid, I told him at the end, you're not getting a job because all he does is get promoted. He couldn't tell me why he was promoted. When I dug and dug and dug, right, he couldn't get behind the why of why they gave me these jobs, other than people were leaving. They didn't have anyone else to give the job to, right? It wasn't a big office. So he was so proud of these accomplishments, but he was overinflated. He probably didn't earn them. He didn't deserve them. And this kid, he didn't get the job for me. And I told him why. I said, all you do is catch touchdowns. You can't even tell me why you've succeeded. You've been promoted so fast in all these jobs. You weren't around long enough to even see if it worked. 3 years later, we hired him. He came back, he interviewed, he took that feedback to heart. And he had something to show that I started here and I took it and I made it better and I grew. And we hired him and he was with the company for 10 years, did an amazing job for us.
So in the first pass, he had no self-awareness. He didn't. He couldn't tell you what was happening and he wasn't sure why. And he's, like a post turtle. The turtle's up on the post and doesn't know how he got there or what's going on or how he's going to get down.
He had an overinflated opinion of himself, because all he's known is success, even though it was kind of happening because there was no one else.
So you're a hiring manager and that's what you hear. This is what I hear as a hiring manager. This person doesn't have problem solving skills or communication skills that can explain to me what's happening. Like maybe they're great, maybe they're wonderful, but I can't feel it or sense it. And you can't sell me on why. So I don't know all the other parts of the story and just hearing this, but what I hear point blank is you can't convince me. So what I do here is I lean in. It's okay. I push and I ask and I say, okay, can you tell me why you got promoted? What happened? Like, give me some kind of clue. Help me understand it. And if I get a crap answer, what I'll come back to is, okay, let's go through another accomplishment. Let's do something else. Talk to me about something. I think it goes into our next question. Why should I hire you? It's a perfect time to pivot if someone moves off of a story. Well, let me ask a question. I just told you something about why I got promoted a bunch of times and you pivoted to this question. What did I not give you? What don't you have? Like those are questions that you can ask as an interviewee very quick. Like I love when I get a question like that. Did I not answer your question properly? Yeah, I don't feel comfortable. Were you the only one to get promoted with battlefield promotions or did you earn it?
So let's dig in more on why should we hire you. The first thing I'll say is get over yourself if someone asks you this question. I see a lot of people get irritated of that's such an arrogant question and who says I want to work for you in the first place? And it's like, okay, well, listen,
you're here.
You're here. You obviously need money. Like, give them something to talk about here. So I think for me, this is an opportunity to prove that you can listen and you've been paying attention in the interview process. You're very unlikely that you get asked this question right out of the gate. Like, if someone sits you down and within 2 minutes says, "Why should I hire you?" They're probably just a crappy interviewer, or
you suck and they want to get rid of you.
or they just don't want it's probably not a great environment to go work in the first place, because they're so busy that I'm going to do a speed 5-minute interview. Like, that's not the kind of place you want to go work anyway. But normally when I've asked this question, it's exactly what Frank said. I'm on the fence. I've just spent 40 minutes with you. I'm on the fence. I'm not sure you're assertive enough. I'm not sure you can explain yourself well enough. I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I'm going to ask you to close me. And especially if you're in some kind of customer related or management sales position, I'm going to ask you to close me. I'm going to, just like a customer might do to a salesperson. And this is where you prove you've been listening. This is where you can stop and say, "That's a great question. From everything I've ascertained from the types of questions you've asked me, the types of questions other interviews have asked me, the type of people you've told me have succeeded in this company, I think you're looking for someone who's resilient. I think you're looking for a person who's a problem solver, who's resourceful. I have a great story to tell you of why I'm that kind of person." And then share one of your best stories right there and say, "I think that proves that I'm the type of person that your company tends to hire."
So I've
stories
had,
again, stories. Don't throw a bunch of adjectives at me. Tell me a story.
I love it. Here's the other way I've seen that answered insanely well. Is it okay if I open up my my notes? Of course. And I go, "This is your job ad. This is how I, in my career, have done this job. This is how I can do this job. This is how I will do this job." They literally make the answer specific to me. And if I was on the fence and you're that prepared and you're that ready and you're able to take a fastball thrown by me directly at you and you can diffuse it, that's the kind of person I want to hire. Okay, tell me about it. Why? What was your problem? So, like, this isn't magic. Like, you're giving me some type of reason, a story, a thought through process, critical thinking, a strategy, something that you've worked on that you knew how to counteract that question. Because Ian and I, like, when you walk in my office, I have an intimidating office, and you sit across from me and you crush that, like, you're not going to fold. That's the kind of person I want to hire. That's what I'm looking for. Like, I don't know. I think I've said everything that you've asked, and I think I would do a good job here. The interview's over. You pivot that and you give me back a heater, and you give me back depth and things that I want to lean into, and I'm writing vigorously. Those are the types of things that you want to drive towards.
So the last question that you absolutely could be having in a fantastic interview with me,
and you could blow it.
And this is the last question that I'm going to ask you, and you can absolutely destroy everything right here. So the last question I will always ask in an interview is, what questions do you have for me? I try to give the last 10, 15 minutes to the candidate. And on its surface, this is a softball, but this is also another test. And what would I be testing for, Frankie, when I ask that question as a hiring manager at the end of an interview?
A few things: problem solving, intelligence, and prep. Did you prep?
Did you prep? There's nothing worse than asking that question. And maybe
I've asked everybody else I've interviewed with, I've got all my answers.
Yeah. Like, maybe they look at their
sure?
notes and they'll say, "Yeah, I think I got all of my questions answered already, with some of the previous interviewers." And I'm always shocked by that. Like, you have no questions for me. It's almost insulting. Like, you don't really care about my opinions or how I got into this company or what, there's 1,000 questions individual to me that you could ask. And all you had to do was show a little bit of preparation. Google me, Google the company, go to my website, look around, talk to a few people in the process. It shows zero emotional intelligence when you don't like this part where you say this. You should ask questions until I literally, as the hiring manager, say, I've got to wrap it up. Just keep asking questions. Be so eager to get information, because this shows me also, Frank, that you're not desperate for a job. When someone has no questions and they just want to take the job, they don't come across as in demand to me. It doesn't come across as you're evaluating whether this is a good career opportunity. It feels like you need a paycheck. And so, like, why would I ask any questions? Can I have a job? I'll come work. The more questions you ask, the more I'm starting to think, well, damn, this person has choices. They don't have to take this job. So I better do a great job answering these questions.
So let's have a little fun. Here are some answers. These don't have to be complicated answers, but these are some good ones. What does my first day of work look like? Who will I report to? What will I be doing? How does compensation work? Do you have a 401k? What about benefits? What is your longest tenured employee? What would they say about the company? All kinds of things.
Why is this position open? I love that question.
Great question.
Why
I've never gotten that question.
Open? Did you fire the person? Did they leave? If they left,
question.
why? Right? Could you tell me a little bit about your management style? What type of people do you love to lead? Let me get a little personal with Frank, right? Frank, you've been with this company 11 years. What keeps you at this company? What do you love about this company? You obviously have done the right things. You've been promoted within. How did you move up in the company? Get me working on my ego. Show that you have some personal interest in me as your potential manager.
So I'm easy, right? Because my name's on the door. I'm not very creative. If you don't have questions for me, and I started a business, we've been at it for 15 years, and we have 50 employees, that just shows zero creativity. Come up with something. How'd you come up with the name?
But Frank, when you say that, that's really obvious. Do you still have people that will say, I don't have questions left because they've been asked?
Yes.
And you are literally Frank Cava. I'm sitting here talking to the founder, the owner of the company. If you did any research, you know when you founded the company, how you've grown it. You're in this big office with employees everywhere. You got a chance to talk to the guy whose name's on the door, and I don't have any questions. I've asked them all.
That's it.
Think about that. If you're having a 50-minute interview and you're like, I'm thinking I'm liking this person, and they say, I've got no questions at all for you. Is it like just the cold, wet rag thrown on you? It can completely change your decision.
I can't think that I've actually ever hired anybody that had no questions for me. If it was no questions, we'd already kind of established the fact that this is the wrong fit. So what I think we should pivot to is this. Let's pivot to good questions. This is my favorite question. This is my favorite answer to this question. Frank, I've given you everything I can in this interview, and I think I deserve this job, but I'm going to ask you this question. Is there something from me that I haven't told you that you wish you knew about me, so you offer me a job? I have had that question multiple times, mostly salespeople. That's a great question. That's a question of, is there something I missed? That is my absolute favorite question. And usually I'll answer it. I'll ask questions back. It turns into another spirited conversation. And then I'll be like, okay, seriously, are there any questions for me about the company? Is there anything about the job? Is there anything about comp? Then I'm asking you and trying to dig out of you, are you going to say yes to a job offer? That's what I'm getting into then, because I'm already sold and I've got to go talk to the other folks that have interviewed you. But at this point, I want to pivot from interviewer to salesman, and I want you on my team. So now I'm figuring out, are there any hurdles I need to cross?
I absolutely love that question. And I think that's the salesman in me is, a good salesperson is not going to they're not hoping, let's have another meeting, let's follow up later. It's, hey, the two of us
manifest destiny, baby.
Let's
take it
close.
On.
Let's close. What do you think? Right? What do you think? We've spent some time together now. Do you think I'm a good fit? That's a great question. Put them on the spot. And if they hem and haw, say, obviously I haven't convinced you, what area are you still concerned with? That I might not be able to do this job, and get them to say it if they're hemming and hawing a little bit, and say, okay, that's fair. Could I share a story that might change your mind there? Boom, get it. Don't hope that somehow in the interview panel, it's going to get fixed. Deal with it right there. Get the close with every hiring manager.
So this has happened in an interview. I've been asked that question. I'm like, give me a second. I go through my notes and I'm like, I'm a little bit unclear about this. And I'll ask a question. And people who fold, it's over. People who lean into it and crush it, that's when you have a hire on your hands. Because it's exactly what we talked about with the bartender. You have a brief setback. How do you regroup? How do you gather yourself and how do you move forward? That is what's critically important. It's not showing up beautiful. It's making yourself as such by hard work and doing things. And that is what you're trying to drive out in an interview. And I got some feedback at one point, and I think it's worth kind of bringing up at the end. Someone that I trusted as a hiring manager and was an early mentor to me in my career, and it's a baseball reference. Ian's mired in baseball cards at the moment. It's perfect. He goes, I walk into that interview and I'm me. The door closes. I become Barry Bonds, all-time leader in home runs. Very, 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 very self-assured and arrogant is a way to put it. I pound my chest. That door opens. I walk out on me again. I was like, explain that. And they're like, that's my hour. That's my hour and a half to prove to you that I can do every single thing that this job requires. And it's my job to convey to you that I can do it. Now, you don't want to be overly arrogant, but at the same time, that is the type of tenacity that you need to have inside of that interview. And don't waste it. Like, it could come down to one decision. If it's a question, don't miss that chance.
That's a fantastic close. And, I think I would say for the hiring managers, for people that have to interview, this is now 2 full episodes, and there are no trick banger questions here. These are very simple, open-ended questions that give someone a chance to elaborate. You can go in a lot of directions. They're very open-ended questions so that you are kind of forced into a story. There's not a lot of close-ended questions that get a yes or a no or one word. These are questions that get someone talking so they can share more with you. So there's nothing really, I'm not a big fan of trick questions. I know Frank isn't. I'm into simple questions that I can ask everyone the same thing, and you provide the color. And I'm not the star here. I'm here to evaluate. I'm here to learn. Most of my questions are probes off of the same 10 questions. Could you tell me more? Could you tell me more? Do you have another example? Is there something else? Frank said he'll ask the same question on success or achievements 3, 4, 5 different ways because he wants to keep hearing your process. I ask the failure question over and over and over because I'm a big fan of growth mindset, folks. And that matters to me, how you think about failure. So don't overthink the questions you ask. Don't try to get too tricky. Try to get too interesting. Ask open-ended questions and really sit back and listen and probe to try to let people tell you their stories.
So I think as a close for me, what I will say is this. Interviewers and interviewees, be mindful of the process. Understand what you're going in to do, right? Both sides. As an interviewer, I know 6 to 15 things I'm looking for. And I've already kind of summarized those here. As an interviewee, that's what the person sitting across the table from you is driving at. I have plenty to do. Since I've been on this podcast, since I've been in an interview with someone, I've probably gotten 10 or 15 text messages. My phone's rang a bunch of times. I got a bunch of emails. And this is not driving revenue. It isn't. The interview doesn't do a damn thing to help move the needle. I want to hire you if you're sitting across from me. I posted an ad. I want to find a good candidate. I want to hire you. It is your job to convince me that you deserve to be here and you deserve to be on this team and you're going to do a great job. You're not going to be perfect, but you're going to do those things. The way you can set yourself up to achieve is you talk in ways that you're paying attention and you're talking in ways that I can latch on. If I'm sitting back in my chair in an interview and I'm kind of nodding at you, I'm half checked out. If I'm leaning forward and my pen is moving, I always ask for permission at the beginning of an interview. I'll say, listen, I'm a vigorous note taker, so please don't be distracted by that. I'm listening. You might see the top of my head, but I love to jot down notes so I can remember things that you've said later, ask more questions, have my notes. So if I'm scribbling or if I'm saying, hey, can you hold on a second? Those are good things. I'm into the interview. You're telling me good stuff. If I'm not doing it, pivot it. This is your hour. Own that hour. hey, Frank, maybe I'm off on the wrong foot. Is there something better I can do? I'll guide you. Those are really good things to do in an interview, is to realize what's happening and speak in a way that if you're talking to Ian, it's connecting with him. If you're talking to me, it's connecting with me. And if it's anybody else, it's exactly that, because we want you, or we would not be in that room trying to hire you in the first place.
Awesome. Great summary, man. Hey, if you are new to our podcast, click the subscribe button, click the download button so you get automatic downloads. If you've been listening for a while, we would love it if you gave us a 5-star review wherever you consume our product. And Frankie, it is a pleasure to be back on the horse again, man.
I agree, brother. Good talking to you.
See you, Frankie.